friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to show you how I make my tomato flakes. Not a whole lot has changed since the last video I did several years ago, except for the type of trays that I use to dehydrate them on. Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same, but I figured it's time for a new video anyway. And also to explain why I make flakes rather than powdered tomato. Because the flakes are processed in the blender before I dehydrate them, they will have the same use as a powder, and you can always powder them up as you need them. But most of the time I don't need to do that because I'm using them to make sauce. So once you add the flakes to sauce or soup or whatever, you're going to get the same result because it'll dissolve and break up and work the same way. But the reason I don't make a powder, even though it would take up less space in storage than the flakes do take up a lot less space though than canned tomatoes, is because the powder can turn to brick in your jar if you do not vacuum seal it or keep it vacuum sealed. If it loses the seal while it's in the jar, if it's a powder, it'll just harden right up in there, and it happens fast. If you're going to powder up your dehydrated tomatoes, then you're going to want to vacuum seal the jar every single time, and probably store it in smaller jars than the quart size, like pints or even half pints. Anyway, these are all sealed, but I do still vacuum seal the flakes because they will still go stale, but they won't stick together and turn to a brick the way your powder does. So it's not as big a deal. In fact, I always keep a jar in the cupboard that I'm working through, and I don't vacuum seal it between every use like I would have to do if it was powder. So that's why I prefer the flakes. So let's get to the process of actually making these. So what I do is I make sure I de-stem all my tomatoes, but since I'm going to be processing them up, I don't worry about that part right there. Normally I would cut that out if I was going to can it or use it in something else, but since it's going to be all processed up, no one's going to notice this in there. And so what I want to do with each tomato is, get over here, is to cut it, depending on the size of the tomato, into at least quarters. Now when you're first getting started and putting it in your blender, you know, the first batch, you might want to cut them into eighths. And if it's a bigger tomato, like a couple of the ones I have here, I'm going to cut it in even smaller pieces. And then I've got some of these vernissage tomatoes that are bigger than a cherry tomato. Those a lot of times I'll cut in half. And then I like to start with just a few in there at a time to get it, because if you pack too much in there at once, it'll be hard for it to blend up nicely. So just stick a few in there and process it until it's liquid. Then you can just keep adding a bunch, and even these you could put in whole, though I still cut them in half before tossing them in the blender, and you don't have to worry about your pieces being as small. So let me process these up real quick. That was really fast. And you'll see these are all a darker tomato because these are all either blacks or purples. I don't have any red tomatoes this year. I'm finding the blacks and purples always do pretty good for me. So even though this tomato is a little bit bigger, now that I've got a little bit of liquid in there, I can throw bigger chunks in there and it's going to be just fine. And I do still like to cut the smaller round ones in half just to make sure they don't just keep rolling around in there when I go to process. And then I'll process again. And I don't have to make sure it's fully processed because this is just to make it easy for me to keep doing this. And I don't have to keep stopping and stirring it and whatever. Just add in a bit at a time. So I'm going to finish processing what I've got here. Now I went ahead and processed it longer, so it's pretty smooth in there. These are the trays I use now. These are silicone. The round ones you can get if you have a Nesco, and I'll link to these down below. But for the Kasori, like I have, or for the Excalibur, if you want to get the Bright Kitchen, you can. But they have since, now there is other brands out there that have the same size as for the Cosori and the Excalibur, but they're less expensive. Because I think I paid about $20 for each set of 3 that I bought. I have 6 trays on my Cosori, so I paid about $40 to get a total of 6 of these silicone trays with the lip on it to hold liquid ingredients. Yet I found one that's in a brown color that I'll link to down below, where you can get 6 for $20. So half the price, or maybe it's $22, so almost half the price. So anyway, because my Cosori is in the other room, I'm going to have to take all this one in here because I don't want to be carrying this all through my foyer and then back into the other room where my Cosori is hooked up. So it's important that you do this close to your dehydrator so you don't have to be moving it around much and then risk spilling it. And by the way, if you have a Nesco style where you can just stack the trays and go, that's really easy with this because you don't have to worry about carrying it at all. Just make sure your dehydrator is set up right where you want it. Nothing's going to be moved once you start putting that stuff in there. Then you put your silicone cover like this onto your Nesco tray, onto the base, pour the tomato mixture in there, add the next tray, and keep doing it that way, and don't move anything, and just let it run. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can stick your tray, if it's on a Cosori or a Excalibur, stick it part way into the dehydrator itself and then pour it like that, and then all you have to do is slide it in. I found that I tried it that way for a few things and found that doesn't work as well for me as if I just set it on the counter next to the dehydrator, because there's so little space to work with once you have, if you're just doing the bottom tray, that's one thing, but when you start adding the trays, you have less and less space to work with to make sure that you can spread with your silicone spatula your mixture out evenly on your tray. So I like to do all that first and then carefully put it into my dehydrator. And I find I actually spill less doing it that way than when I put it part way into the dehydrator and then try to fill it in there. I find it easier just to have it right in front of the dehydrator. And then I run, it takes about, I usually don't like to dehydrate it anything above 115 degrees. Sometimes I'll do certain meats and stuff higher than that. But whenever I'm using silicone especially, I try to keep the heat lower, or anytime I'm doing herbs. And the lower you do your heat, the more of the nutrients you're going to preserve in whatever it is you're dehydrating anyway. And so I set it at 115 degrees, and then it takes about 18 hours for it to fully dry. And if you go through there, sometimes you might find when you go to break it up, you have thicker spots on it. Then you can just and they don't dehydrate as well, then just run it for another hour or 2. And then what I do is I simply take that, and which is another reason why these are so nice, is then I can just take the silicone mat, the little tray or whatever you want to call it, and then I can just roll it up, usually where I took the corners of opposite sides and folded them up on each side and gathered everything to the middle. And then you can usually easily just then get it in a position like this and just pour it into your jar that way. So that will work with your Excalibur and Cosori type trays. It doesn't work as easily with the Nesco ones because you got the big hole in the middle, but you can still work everything down on these to where it's on one side and then pour it in. You'll still want to use a canning funnel to get it into the jar without making too much of a mess. But another thing that I sometimes do is if the tomato stays kind of stuck and it doesn't all, come off easily enough and work towards the middle, you can take it and just kind of crunch it like this and then break it up. You'll still want to do this over something where if pieces fall out, you have something to catch it in, like a cookie sheet or something. And that will help. That's one way you can do it. So just find the way that works best for you. I'm always just trying different things when I do that. And then once I have the process all done, everything's dried and I have it into my jars, I then vacuum seal the jars. So these are already vacuum sealed. This is the one from 2019. This one here is from this year. And there's several different ways you can vacuum seal it. Let me go ahead and open this, Phew, that was a nice seal. Just to say I took some out and I want to go ahead and vacuum seal it again. What you might find is that there's a little coating here of tomato powder. You're going to want to make sure that's cleaned off if you had to open and close it. Either way, your lid rim on the inside needs to be clean. Nothing coated on the inside. And if it's got any tomato powder stuck in there, wipe it off. Same thing with this rim. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that off just to make sure it's nice and clean. And I'm going to rub this just around the edge. I don't want to get it damp on the inside there of the lid because I want this to be very dry. I personally have 3 different ways that I can vacuum seal. One way is I can use my vacuum chamber with the brake bleeder pump. I can use the Food Saver tops or the off-brand tops like this with the brake bleeder pump. Or I can use the off-brand that I bought that comes in a full set. There's one that actually has a handle that looks more like the Food Saver, easier to use. I can use this with the pump that it came with. So I'll link to a set like this down below. I'll link to the one that actually has the handles because those are much easier to get off. I'll link you to a brake bleeder pump. Then also, if you're interested in the vacuum chamber, then just email me and I can give you a product list and pricing. The vacuum chamber is nice if you're vacuum sealing into any recycled jars, pickle jars, olive jars, jam jars, anything that you have. As long as the lid is in good condition, no cracks on the jar, you can vacuum seal in that. And you can do canning jars as well. Now, if I'm vacuum sealing with one of these, then you don't put the band in place. And I have many videos showing how I do this. And then you pump it up with the brake bleeder like this. Or you can use this pump like this. Or if you're going to use the chamber, I didn't obviously vacuum seal it because I'm trying to quickly show you the different methods. If you're using the chamber, then you're going to put the band on, but just like that. Don't put it on any tighter. If you put it on too tight, you won't be able to pull the air out of the jar. So I'm going to show you again. It's the same method of band tightening that you use if you're using Tatler lids. You just do that until the jar moves freely. Carefully put the jar down into your vacuum chamber. Put the lid on and tighten in place. And you'll notice I have 2 brake bleeders because I like to keep this one attached to my chamber at all times. So I'm not wearing out the hose right here, putting it on there and taking it off. And it is kind of hard to get it off because these are barbed fittings right here. And the same thing applies. You just pump this up. And if it's not pumping up, it means you probably don't have your lid on tight enough. It's got to be snug. It does take longer to do it this way than when you're using the Food Saver top because, especially depending on the size of the jar, because you have a lot more air to remove from the chamber and the jar than just the jar alone. But if you rest your brake bleeder pump against the counter like this and just keep pumping until it stops moving. Now I pretty much think I heard it seal. Okay, it did seal. That's funny because it seemed like it didn't pump up far enough. So the jar did seal. As you can see, I'm holding it. I did hear it make a tink sound, so sometimes you can hear that tink. Anyway, that's how you can do it with the chamber. But like I said, the cheapest way if you're just getting started in vacuum sealing is getting yourself your little off-brand set because it comes with the pump. For less than $20, you can get the full set where you have the pump and you have the tops that will fit over your mason jars. Just keep in mind they only work for mason jars, or if they are store brand jars, only the ones that have the same size jar top as your canning jars do, regular or wide mouth. The next step would be either the Food Saver tops or the cheap brown tops, and then a brake bleeder pump. I personally like the brake bleeder pump a little better than this, but this works great. But you're looking at maybe, like say you're getting the Food Saver tops, about $20, $25 for those, and $20 to $25 for a brake bleeder pump. And then there you go. You got your tomatoes all put up, and you can use them in so many different ways. These are what I use to make any kind of sauce or to add to chili or soups. So Italian sauces, barbecue sauce, and many other things that I'm going to want that tomato flavor in. And there you go. That's how I make my tomato flakes and then put them up for long term. As I said, 2 of those jars there are from 2019. So they're already 3 years old. And I'm still adding that. That was when I started getting more serious about putting up the flakes rather than canning. I decided I'm not going to can tomatoes anymore because these are lighter weight. They take up a lot less space in storage, and they're easy to use. I can just take out what I need at a time. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you an idea what to do with your excess tomatoes, or if you're getting tomatoes from a store or from Misfits Market or something and you just want to get a bunch put up while you can, this is one way you can do it that's going to save space and still have multiple uses when it comes to making sauces. And if you've been doing anything like this and started doing the tomato flake idea based on my videos, share with us down below and how you use them. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.